All right, there's just a lot of things going on. So the border updates. I mean, the Texas border, the situation is seems very serious. The latest I find this morning was like the House Committee on Homeland Security. The committee they are impeached the Homeland Security Secretary, something like that. Uh, Alejandro Mayorkas, that's his name. And Biden says he's going to close the border as soon as the border bill passes. But Mike Johnson, the speaker, he says you don't need the Congress pass the bill. Everybody have their own argument, whatever. So can you see? I mean, I want to hear your comments about the whole thing. What is going on? Do you think a civil war is brewing, or it just for shows? Everybody just put up a show.
I do think a lot of this is political theater in reality. I mean, if you look at the border, the truth about the border situation, a couple of things. Over the last 3 years, there's been approximately 3 million people come across the border, right? Which means we're averaging 2 million a year. 2 million people crossing your border in a manner that is not consistent with your rules and regulations. It's unsustainable. It is a problematic for any country in the world is going to have a problem with that, right? However, it's like anything else. If you have a headache, if you just take an Excedrin and it may quell the headache, but you could have a brain tumor. You could have a blood clot in your brain. You're not addressing what's causing that. What the warring political parties will not do is talk about the reality that the U.S. empire has destabilized Latin America, the Caribbean, Haiti. Why are there Haitian people showing up at the border? Why are all of these people from coincidentally the same countries that we have overthrown, robbed, and um, and and uh, and um, uh, um, just totally destroyed economically and politically and destabilized. Why are they all showing up? We can't talk about that because the true foundation of the problem at our border is our foreign policy. It's our aggressive, assertive, expansive foreign policy. And that's now showing up at the border. So all they're trying to do is put a Band-Aid on the problem. They're discussing it. And don't get me wrong, there is a problem here. And if you have a headache, there's nothing wrong with taking an Excedrin to address the headache. But if you got a brain tumor, you're going to get another headache. It's just going to keep coming back. You can't. And if you've got a brain tumor, Excedrin oftentimes isn't enough to stop the headache. It won't even mask the symptoms. So right now, the U.S. is in a position where the ruling elite cannot discuss that in a myriad of ways, U.S. foreign policy is starting to come. The chickens of U.S. foreign policy are starting to come home to roost economically at the border, on and on. And we don't have a ruling elite that is intellectually honest enough to have an epistemological, empirical, intellectual discussion about the issues because of what it would expose about their own worldview.
Yeah, and then I see some people do. I mean, there's actually in this time. I mean, the border issue has been on and off, but this time it does seem more and more people are sympathize the Texas governor because, like you said, it's simply not sustainable, right? If you keep on doing this. Plus, some people also complain, in particular, I guess, Trump supporters, that they feel like the illegal immigrant coming in, they took some of the good paying jobs. I don't know how much truth in it, but there might be some because they are employers do want to hire cheap labor, and the illegal immigrant is a good way to go. So it's making things worse when the economy is kind of like right now there's massive layoffs everywhere as well, right? So do you think there's some elements of that too, that people inside there seems to me like a more support for the Texas governor this time?
Well, there are a couple of things going on here. There is both some level of validity to their argument, and then there's other part of their arguments that while they aren't valid, there's a foundation at least of reality. So let's start with this. Are they taking the good paying jobs? Well, no, because there ain't no good paying. I don't know if you looked at our economy, but the jobs these days are working in a mini mart, cleaning out the coffee machine. That ain't a good paying job. Most of the people that are saying this, I don't think they're trying to get a job picking grapes, which is what the people that are coming in doing. They're being abused, and they're doing picking grapes and cleaning and shucking oysters. That's the kind of things they're doing in a seafood house. So, but the reality is this, okay, if you have an influx of labor that is very low wage labor into any economic system, it is going to lower the value of labor in the aggregate. So bringing in a lot of people who need to work for just about anything, who don't even really, they're not legal. So if somebody pays them less than the minimum wage, they got to take it and they'll be happy to take it and work hard for it because they're in a situation of complete and utter desperation. That is going to lower the value of labor as a whole. So the people that are complaining about how undocumented immigration is going to have a negative effect on the labor market, they have a valid claim there. From the perspective of economics, they have a valid claim. But again, what they don't get into is the connection to U.S. expansive foreign policy. You know, a perfect example is Donald Trump. I like to bring this up. Donald Trump, who's leading the fight against undocumented immigration. Okay, but Donald Trump also said recently, a few months ago, he said, yes, if I was in charge, if I had been president, Joe Biden's over there trying to work with Venezuela to let them back on the market so they can sell their oil. Why, if I was in charge, Venezuela would have collapsed and we'd be able to get that oil for nothing, right? So what he's basically saying is this: if I was in charge, we would have destabilized a country of 30 million people completely so that we can steal their natural resources. And where do you think those people who are not far from the US border would have shown up? So Donald Trump, ironically, as he argues that he would do something about immigration, also says, I would do something that would exacerbate the problem exponentially. If you completely, totally destabilize a country of 30 million people into economics collapse, you're going to have 10 million of them at the border. So again, it shows the hypocrisy and absurdity of U.S. foreign policy. And so these people who are saying, the Trump supporter people who have some credible argument about the economic ramifications of bringing in low wage employees, are still supporting a guy without question and without saying, wait a minute, you're going to make the problem worse, which again shows here's what the problem we have in the US. They don't get it.
Yeah. And in the meantime, I think Biden is so headstrong. This one is because he wants his 60 billion or something to go to Ukraine, right? He wants that border bill. It's called the border bill because there's some money goes to the border. But in there, there's, I believe, the 60 billion that goes to Ukraine. He want that. But that's also a non-sustainable war. I mean, how many more Ukrainian has to die before they stop? They really need to stop now. Wouldn't you agree?
How many Ukrainians have to die before they'll stop? All of them, as far as Biden and his people are concerned. As long as they're Ukraine, look, what do? There's send all the young Ukrainians, they get wiped out. Now they're like average age is 40. That means half the people on the battlefield are over 40. So you got a bunch of guys walking around with bad backs, their prostate's gone, their eyesight is shot, and they're running around on the battlefield getting blown to bits. People like me, you know what I mean? 60 years old. I got no business on the battlefield. The days when I could scurry around on the battlefield are far behind me. I would just be a sitting object waiting to catch an artillery round. That would be the only value, and that's their only value. So the Biden administration sees the Ukrainian people as cannon fodder, and they're going to use that cannon fodder until they run out. That's one. Number two, the position on the border that the Biden administration is taking has nothing to do with the border. As you said, they got this war going on in Ukraine, and it is a disastrous failure, as everything the Biden administration does. It is a disastrous failure. It's just what they do. But what they're saying is this: hey, there's a problem on the border. Can we get money for Ukraine? Yeah. Well, what do you need? Billions of dollars and razor wire, whatever. Who cares? Can we get money for you, our Ukraine project? Yes. Whatever you need. Now, keep in mind something this. Even in the Democratic Party, in the constituency, alleged constituency of Joe Biden, the people are like, yeah, we don't like there's parts of this immigration bill that we don't like. And Biden's position is, I don't care what you like. I don't care about my constituents. I don't care what the American people want. I don't care about the border. I don't care about any of it. I got wars going on. I want more money for the wars. We're now seeing what happens when these neocons, fascists, get in charge. The only thing they do is war. They are completely ignoring the needs of the American people. It's all imperialism and war and whatever the Republicans ask for to continue the imperialism and war, they don't care. They'll give them. They care less about the border.
Yeah. Do you think he will get that 60 billion in the end? Because right now they kind of like they stuck there. I mean, on the one hand, that Biden said you have to get rid of all those razor wires, and then the governor, the Abbott said no, we are going to build up more, etc. And then there are other states helping him. I mean, they're sending their own people, and then there's a lot of volunteer also. I mean, right now it's kind of like they both stand off there. So do you think eventually that Biden will get that 60 billion, and that's how this is going to be resolved?
This is a tough one. The bottom line is this. Biden is in a fix here because if he gives them the money, his constituency is going to be angry. If he doesn't give them the money, then his Ukraine project falls apart. Here's what I think. Biden wants to give them the money. He wants to give them. I mean, he wants to give the Republicans whatever they want for the border. That's his plan. Give them whatever they want. We got to keep our Ukraine project going. I do think, though, from the perspective of the Republicans, this is all about politics. The Republicans look at it and they say, well, wait a minute. We can continue to run off this border issue. You know what I mean? We can make hay politically off of this border issue. So why should we resolve the border issue during this during the election season when it's a winning, it's a winning issue for us, right? So no, they're not going to, the Republicans are not going to vote for it. They're not going to say yes. Trump is one of the things, as far as Trump is concerned, I've always said, if you want to win an election, you got to do three things. Number one, turn out your base. Number two, turn out your base. And number three, turn out your base. You turn out your base and you get some of the independents, you're going to win, right? As far as the immigration issue, it's a great way for Republicans from a perspective. I'm not saying good or bad. I'm not putting a spin on it. I'm just saying from the political perspective, you're a Republican. This border issue is a great way to get people to the polls. It's a great way to turn out your base. They're enraged. They're furious. They're all up in a tizzy, right? Great. If you give the money to Biden and solve the issue, Biden can then say, I solved the immigration issue. And now the Republicans can't use that as much on their base. So no, I don't think the Republicans politically want to solve it. I also think from the perspective of Ukraine, there are a lot of Republicans looking at it saying, yeah, we know this Ukraine thing's going to collapse. It's falling apart. The worst possible thing that could happen to us, I'm saying if I'm a Republican, is that they drag it out past the election and then we win. And then it collapses. And then the Democrats say, well, when we were in charge, it was going great in Ukraine. But as soon as the Republicans took it over, it collapsed. It's all the Republicans' fault. If you're a Republican, you don't want that to happen. You know it's going to collapse. If you're a Republican, you say, let's let it collapse now. And then we'll say, my God, look what the Democrats did. They let the Ukraine project. It was all a disaster. How terrible are they? I think from a political perspective, the Republicans realize, I'll put it like this. There are a lot of people, enough people in the Republican Party who realize that it is a what will you call it? An albatross around the neck of the Democratic Party, that they're going to take advantage of that. There are Republicans who have supported the Ukraine project all along and who are afraid that they'll go down with the ship because they've already supported it. But knowing politicians in America, they'll jump off. Rats will jump off the sinking ship the first chance they get. So it's possible that they get the money. I don't think, and I'll just say politically speaking, without using my far left-wing bias, if the Republicans are smart, they won't let them do it. If they're politically smart, they will not bail Joe Biden out by allowing him to have the appearance that he resolved the issue on the border.
Yeah, because it will make him look too good because he will get the money for the Ukraine war and get the border issue resolved. Yes.
Yep. Ain't happening.
There's nothing good for the Republican side. Yes. Well, we'll see. Well, the other crisis now brewing is the Middle East, of course. They're just reported that the 3 U.S. Soldiers were killed. And then actually, I think in the Chinese media, they're saying multiple U.S. bases has been under attack for a while now.
Yes.
So, so where does this go? Because here I see some rhetoric. I mean, Lindsey Graham, of course, but here this morning I saw Tom Cotton. This is the Political said something like this: The only answer to these attacks must be devastating military retaliation against Iran's terrorist forces, both in Iran and across the Middle East. That sounds pretty serious to me. Do we even know that Iran is behind this? Are we sure it's not Israel? I mean, because Israel is the country who really wants to draw United States into this whole conflict full-hearted, right? Israel has been trying that. I mean, do we even know who behind all these attacks? But it doesn't seem matter at this point, is it?
Well, at this point, any attacks rhetorically speaking, from the perspective of imperialist rhetoric, right? Anything that happens in the U.S., I mean, in the Middle East, the U.S. says Iranian backed, Iranian supported, Iranian proxies. That is the imperialist rhetoric of the U.S. because the Iran is the evil enemy there, right? Okay, couple of things going on, and that is the U.S. they always said, well, if we go to a war, we could keep the Straits of Hormuz open because 30% of the world's oil goes to the Straits of Hormuz. And in the event that the Straits of Hormuz, which goes to the Persian Gulf, which Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, Kuwait, they all use to transit their oil out. If the Straits of Hormuz, out of the Persian Gulf, if the Straits of Hormuz is closed, they can't transport their energy products out, and the world energy market, spins out of control. The price goes through the roof and it drives everybody into economic, disaster, if not collapse. Okay. Well, what we know is this: the U.S. empire can't stop the Yemen military, which is very lightly armed, from closing the Red Sea. So they sure as heck can't stop a country as powerful as Iran from closing the Straits of Hormuz. And Iran is not, Tom Cotton and these people are thinking of Afghanistan or Yemen. They're not thinking about Iran. They're not taking into account that Iran has the military capability to hit back and really, really hard. That in fact, they may have an overwhelming military capability in the Middle East. They have the ability to sink American ships, to flatten every American base, to close the Straits of Hormuz and wipe out our economy. So the question becomes, and let me add one other thing to it. So, well, part of it would be if the U.S. would attack Iran, they would be taking on the responsibility for the potential of a worldwide economic collapse. And Europe would be first to go, right? Additionally, the bases throughout the U.S. throughout the Middle East, the ones that are getting hit are illegal. The bases in Syria are illegal. So in the same way that Israel, according to international law, a significant portion of Gaza, the Golan Heights, et cetera, Israel acquired those through the 1967 war, through a military conflict. And under international law, if you acquire land during a military conflict, at the end of that conflict, you have to return that or you're illegally occupying it. So under international law, Israel is illegally occupying Gaza. And what they're doing is they say we're defending ourselves and responding, but under international law, does the occupier have the right to respond to the occupier? You know what I mean? So Israel has that issue. The same question arises with the bases in Syria. That's why initially Joe Biden said we had bases in Jordan that were attacked and 3 people killed. And then the leaders in Jordan came out and said, whoa, 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 not in Jordan. They were in Syria. But the Biden couldn't say in Syria, because if he does, then that creates a conversation. And the conversation is, what are we doing with bases in Syria? And are they illegal? And since they are illegal, how can we argue that we are defending them or that we're striking back or retaliating for illegal bases? It's the exact same argument of Israel. You're an occupier. You don't have a right to use force to defend an occupation. So interestingly enough, Joe Biden gave it away when he said it was Jordan that was attacked. He gave away that they knew they were wrong, and that they had no excuse, and that they don't have a valid reason for retaliating against whoever attacked them because they're there illegally. You've got the Iraqi bases that are being attacked, but the Iraqis are saying to the U.S., we want you to leave. And the U.S. is saying no. So the U.S. is illegally occupying a region, and bit by bit, the people in the region are turning up the heat on the U.S. empire. Now, will the U.S. empire take a single move that obliterates its own economy and basically gets itself run out of the region? That stands yet to be seen. But we know that the U.S. Congress is the most hawkish entity in the U.S. empire. Anytime anybody bats an eye around the world, 100 members of Congress say, let's fire a missile. So we will see where this goes. I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if they do something really, really stupid, but if they do, there's going to be a significant price to pay.
Now that answered my question because I saw it says Jordan, but then it's reported it's not in Jordan, it's in Syria. Now you explain that why they have to say it's in Jordan. Otherwise, like you said, it's illegal. The base there is illegal, right? In Syria is
Yes.
illegal. Yeah, okay. Now I understand because it's so confusing, that why are they doing that? Yeah.
Yes.
Now, related to that, I see that UK is talking about the conscription. Does that mean the US is also, I mean, I also see something about reintroduce the draft. Now, for one thing, the US military has problem recruiting, right? And now with all these wars going on, I mean, there seems that the US is stretching thin, wouldn't you think? So do you think it's going to be reintroduce the draft? I mean, where do we get all the people?
Well, okay, there are a couple of issues that they have, and this is the one big one. Look, in World War II, the U.S. was like, oh, we're attacked. People were joining. They were, okay, everybody, you're going to be conscripted, et cetera. And people were going into the military saying, we've got to fight, Japan and the Germans or whatever. Okay. So the FDR was the president. Here's a guy who got elected, 4 times. He had to die to get out of office. He was so popular, right? Okay. It's the opposite now. In the UK, in the US, imagine a country trying to mobilize for war when the people in the country despise the ruling elite, have no trust for the ruling elite. The ruling elite, there's a crisis of legitimacy where we literally almost have a civil war going on. We have people right now got their arms. There's a big trucking convoy going to Texas. So we have all these people saying, we are ready to fight our own government if we have to. And they're going to start a war and say, okay, guys, here's what we need you to do. We need you to all take up your guns, and we're going to the Middle East to fight for Israel. Not the most popular war in the United States, I'm going to add that. And amongst young people, you look at the people that they would be mobilizing, that they would be conscripting, are in the street saying, stop the genocide. So you're going to say, hey, I know you, could you put down that sign that says, Genocide Joe? And now we want to put a rifle in your hand and you're going to go fight for the people that you are protesting against. I have a feeling that's going to go real bad for the U.S. empire if they try that. This place would come unraveled. What are they going to do? Now they're going to say, okay, you're conscripted. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of young people are going to get that letter and throw it in the trash. Say, or you have to put me in jail. I ain't going. Do we have enough prisons? Do we have the court system to adjudicate 1 million people who says, I'm not going, you're going to have to put me in jail? What do we do then? So the United States is up against an issue that if they started any major war, the ruling elite is so despised and distrusted, who's going to follow them? The war they got to worry about is not Russia or China or Ukraine or anywhere else. The war they got to worry about is the people here who are on the verge of putting a rope around the ruling elite necks and throwing the other end over an oak tree, a limb.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, because my next question to you is actually the ICJ ruling. But before that, what I find interesting is I don't understand why the Biden administration is so stubborn in terms of their support to Israel, the bombing in Gaza. The Biden literally being called the genocide Joe. And wherever he goes, he is now campaigning, right? And then wherever he goes, people will pop up, ceasefire, genocide Joe, all that kind of thing. Just the most reason why I find it very interesting. He was, I think, in Northern Virginia somewhere talking about the women's right to choose. Okay, the women's. Literally, he had a whole bunch of women standing behind him because they know somebody will come up and talk. They will have signs up and scream at him, etc. And that's exactly what happened. So every time somebody's saying, ceasefire now, ceasefire, those people, those women behind him saying 4 more years, so help him. So this guy is talking about women's rights that supposedly he can protect women's rights and literally had to be protected by those women behind him. I just find it's extraordinary. the whole thing. Then why does he do that? Why can't he just say, let's do a ceasefire? Why is he so stubborn in terms of this thing? What is in there for the United States? Or for
Well,
him,
first,
even
yeah,
for him
first of
as, politically.
Well, what we're looking at is this: is you're trying to use. I'll put it like this: as Voltaire said, any belief that is not founded in reason and logic will not be swayed by it. So you are trying to interpret irrational, fascist, militaristic mindsets. You're trying to evaluate them from the perspective of a rational person, right? It doesn't make sense to us. But then again, we're not fascists, so it wouldn't make sense to us. These are ideologues. So from their perspective, they don't think it out like what's in the best interest of mankind or people or innocent civilians. No, Joe Biden has long said, I am a Zionist. That's the position he's taken. And that's what he's going to support. And no matter what happens, again, as I said, they really don't care about the United States. They don't care about their people. They don't care about they are disconnected. They're members of the ruling elite, and they believe that they have a right, dare I say, a duty to make the decisions of leadership because the rest of us aren't wise enough, aren't smart enough to understand. And so therefore, they're going to make all the decisions and they're doing what's best. We just have to go along with it. They just don't care what we think. And Joe Biden and Blinken and these people, they're fascists. They're not rational actors on the international stage. It should be obvious to everyone right now. How can you have a while back, someone literally asked Joe Biden, can we afford a war with China and Russia at the same time? And he said, are you kidding me? And the Middle East, he said, we're America. We're the most powerful country in the world, in the history of the world. Sure, we can do that. We can go to war, I mean, Joe Biden. So it's a mindset of imperialism, a mindset of privilege and domination that says I'm greater and more powerful. It's a mindset that says the world is a hierarchy, but we're not even part of the hierarchy. We're above the hierarchy. We are like gods, masters of the hierarchy. We make the rules. We are the judge, we're the jury, we're the advocate, we're the penal system, everything. And so with that kind of mindset, the thoughts of the people don't come into play, and the rationality and the limits of power, because that's part of what we're talking about, the limits of power. What can you do? What can you get away with? What can you enforce? They don't have a concept of limits of power because they're not rational actors. And I say these people are fascists. I mean, that's what they actually are. That's, I add this. They're isolated. They're at war with their own people. Look at the censorship. Well, you're not allowed to talk about this or discuss this. At Davos, they literally said the number one problem in the world, is it homelessness? Is it poverty? Is it the struggle of the working? No, the number one problem they said is misinformation. Well, you got to be pretty privileged, very privileged, before your problem has nothing to do with food and shelter and survival and raising and educating your kids. It has to do with people saying things that you disagree with. Why? Because their narrative is so brittle. And they realize they are no longer legitimate in the eyes of the public, and that this thing could come crumbling down around them at any given time. And we're getting closer to the point where it does.
Yeah, just recently, CNN literally said that China didn't have enough censorship, the lack of censorship, because because
Sure.
The Chinese netizens are not very sympathetic to Israel, and after the ICJ ruling, so a lot of people commented on the social media, etc., etc., and literally that's what the CNN said: the lack of censorship in China.
Oh, but wait a minute. Before that, we were told the Chinese people have no rights
Yeah.
and they're censored, right? So at the same time, people in China have no rights whatsoever and they're censored in everything they do. But the real problem is there's not enough censorship. That is the contradiction of the American ruling class. The American people are starting to see that and say, what the heck are these people talking about? They're insane. They don't care. On any given day, I like to say this, they're apathetic about the truth, right? They're not liars or truth tellers. They use language as a means to an end. So if what they say happens to be true, that's fine. If it happens to be false, that's fine. As long as they're saying if on a given day it benefits me to say China has too much censorship. China has too much censorship. Tomorrow it benefits me to say they don't have enough. They don't have enough. If I got to go back the next day and they have too much and go back and forth from day to day, it doesn't matter to them whether they're contradicting their own statements of yesterday or 2 minutes ago. In fact, Wikipedia at one point, and Max Blumenthal has that up over his Twitter account. Wikipedia had the gray zone is both a far left and a far right website at the same time. They eventually took it down, but that's where they are. It's far left, it's far right, it's all of the above, whatever works for us. And they wonder why they're losing credibility and legitimacy amongst the working class. They are a farce. Who watches the real issue is really nobody's going to know that what CNN said because nobody's watching CNN anymore. The people watching CNN are like 80 years old, diehard Democrats.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, for the ICJ, what is your view on that? Does that make, I mean, it is pretty unprecedented, right? And what is your comment on the ruling? And also, do you think it make any difference?
Well, a couple of things. I think it's important because the United States uses this term rules-based international order, and we all know what that means. It just simply means imperialist domination by the U.S. We're the hegemon, and we can tell anybody in the world what to do, and we don't have to go by the rules. We can make rules, we can get rid of rules. Okay. And so I've been saying for a while, the conflict we have is by international law, is between the UN and international law, right? A set of transparent rules, right? Everyone has agreed upon these rules, has signed off on them. They're transparent. You can go read them. They apply the same to everyone, right? So we got transparent set of rules that anybody can read. That versus the rules-based international order, which simply means U.S. hegemony. That was the battle. That battle has come to the forefront now because South Africa, I'm sure with the assistance of other BRICS members, wink, wink, I'm sure of that, has decided, look, let's try this thing out. Let's see, let's bring the rules-based international order up against the international law and force the United States, smoke them out, as they say, force them the United States to come out, same United States that'll say China and the Uyghurs, they're violating international law, Russia's in Navalny, international law, Iran with women, everybody's violating international law. Okay, great. You want to use international law. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to put forth a complaint utilizing international law and see just how much you respect it. They're going to force the United States to say, we're not going to respect international law and we're not going to accept international law and go by international law. Number one, that means the United States can't go around the world telling everybody they're violating international law anymore. But number two, the United States doesn't have the power and authority it used to. So now the UN is going to vote. The U.S. will likely veto it in the UN Security Council, but then it goes to the general body, the general membership, and you can get a vote there. And the United States is in a fix because we are now in a situation where the world can vote against the U.S. and say, okay, you're in trouble. What are you going to do? The United States is just going to have to say, we're going to ignore it and become a rogue nation, which it already is. It'll be exposed as a rogue nation. So what this I think ends up doing is it's exposing the United States as a rogue nation who refuses to go by international law, who is trying, but it then isolates the United States, because if the body of the UN votes as a whole and says the world has voted and the world says this is wrong, you have to do this or that, and the US just says no, we're not doing it, you're completely isolated at this point. It's putting the U.S. in a position where it has to isolate itself diplomatically from the rest of the world. And at that point, what happens if if there are rulings and they say, well, we're going to put economic sanctions on Israel, we're going to do something to try to get this to stop. Now, the U.S. is completely at odds with international law, and it isolates the United States. Now, let me add this. The U.S. uses narratives. The Chinese are doing something evil to the Uyghurs, right? Okay, and China says that's absurd. And the people in the region say, yeah, that's pretty much absurd. And the US just continues to say, yeah, they are. They're doing it, right? Okay. Now we've created a dynamic where China can go to the International Criminal Justice because the US has put sanctions on China based on this narrative, right, that they're hurting the Uyghurs. What happens now if China says, I got an idea? I'm going to the International Criminal Justice Court and I'm going to file a complaint. And my legal complaint is going to be that the U.S. has put illegal sanctions against us that's hurting our country, that's hurting our economy based on a lie. But we are willing to go before the court and we're willing to make our empirical argument that what they're claiming that we're doing genocide against the Uyghurs isn't happening. But we're willing for the U.S. to come in and and make their complaint. See, the U.S. just makes these absurd narratives that have no foundation. Now, China puts forth a 84-page complaint to show they're not doing anything to the Uyghurs, and then the court says to the U.S., "Okay, come in and give me your response and your evidence that they're doing whatever evil things to the Uyghurs." Well, we already know they have none. What happens now? Syria says we're going to file a complaint. You're hurting us. You have all of these things you're doing to us. You got an illegal basis. We're filing a complaint to the International Court of Justice that says you're illegally occupying our country. We're filing a complaint to an assertion, with a lawsuit against you in the ICJ that says that you're sanctioning us and you accused us of using chemical weapons, but we didn't do it. Here's all of our 84-page document to the ICJ. The United States, you have to respond. The United States can't respond to any of these things because they're all lies. I think one of the things is it's opened the door for people to say, wait a minute, if the United States has to respond to a court, then all of these lies and narratives that they make can be exposed in court. We can say you've created a narrative, but there's nothing behind it. We're going to go to the ICJ. At that point, the United States either has to be exposed or just has to say, well, we've decided we're not going to go by the International Court of Justice anymore because whatever, Putin loves them or something like that. But at that point, they're isolated and they're exposing themselves as not being part of the international community. So a door has been opened. That's the International Court of Justice. And I hope to see countries rushing through that door, including China. Russia. Russia needs to go there and say, hey, you claim that we killed all of these people in Bucha. We're going to go to the ICJ, and you're saying this happened. You're claiming that we want to go to court. We want to go to court and adjudicate this. Mm-hmm. And now all of these preposterous claims that the U.S. is making against all of their adversaries are now brought out in an environment where the U.S. has to come there and has to substantiate its claims, which it can't do. And its only option then is to isolate itself and walk away from the court. So I think really powerful things have happened here. Now, the most important thing didn't happen because we're talking about what happens in court. We're talking about how these things are adjudicated, but there are bombs being dropped on real human beings right now in Gaza. And what needs to stop is the violence in Gaza. So the true tragedy here is that all of the people like us can discuss these things in the theoretical realm, and the people in Gaza are being killed, starved, and abused. So I don't want to have like some glee over the outcome because the outcome is theoretical, and in the physical world, people are suffering, and that suffering needs to stop. So I did want to add that caveat to my comments.
Well, but the ICJ actually is part of the United Nations, right? So in a way, the United Nations, the Security Council, aren't they supposed to do something as a result of this ruling? Because they need to enforce some kind of a right. The ruling is the ruling, and then seems to me UN is the organization need to enforce the ruling. Don't you think that the Security Council should have some kind of a? But of course, US will veto it. Is that what's going to happen?
Yeah, whatever goes to I would imagine, and it's clear the U.S. has staked out their position because on the date that on the Friday when the ICAJ issued their ruling, the U.S. and its patsies, the UK, Japan, et cetera, its other vassals, all came out and said, well, we're no longer going to provide money to the UN relief agency that provides humanitarian aid to the Palestinians, right? So they came out and made their disdain for the court known. So, it is what it is as far as the U.S. And their position on it. Will they veto it? They'll do whatever they can to protect the Israeli, onslaught on Gaza and support it. But I just think that exposes who they are. And then once they veto it, it goes to the General Assembly where they will be voted they'll lose there, and then they'll be further exposed because they're not going to Joe Biden's team. They ain't going along with anything. They believe they can do anything they want in the world. They're going to ignore the rules-based order and pretend that they're going to ignore international law and pretend that the rules-based international order of U.S. hegemony is the supreme law of the world.
Okay. But it's still, I think the vote itself is a little bit surprising to me because when I was first looking at the judges, there's U.S. judge, there's a German judge, all that's people, the Japanese. I mean, I just thought, okay, despite I do think South Africa did an excellent job in terms of making their case. But I just thought, okay, this is a very political thing, so those judges will go along with they will support Israel no matter what. It turns out it's not. I mean, I'm a little bit pleasantly surprised, even though it
Well,
didn't call for a ceasefire immediately, but it did say there's a high probability of genocide, which is pretty powerful statement, I think.
yeah. Well, the thing about it is this: those judges, even if they wanted to find on behalf of Israel, they were in a pickle. I mean, how do you look at that evidence? The evidence was incontrovertible. I mean, let's face it. I was, involved. I've been many, 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 hours and years in court, and I can tell you, you had videotape confessions, multiple videotape confessions. Hey, we're going to kill everybody, all the civilians. It's illegal not to differentiate civilians from military personnel. And they literally said, we're not differentiating the civilians from the military personnel, things that were illegal. The leadership of Israel admitted on videotape proudly. They showed soldiers dancing around. We're going to kill everybody, men, women, children alike. So in reality, though politically some of them may have wanted to, they were not. South Africa created a dynamic where it was impossible for people to look at that evidence and say, oh, yeah, no, there's nothing going on here. That's what happened. They had, certainly I'm sure there were people that wanted to go otherwise. They probably called their respective countries, and leaders and said, look, guys, I really want to find like you want me to find. But I don't know if you looked at the evidence. There ain't nothing I can do. They literally admitted that they were doing it. What am I supposed to do? You got a videotape confession. How do you find the defendant innocent when they did a videotape confession? Although I did see that happen one time in court. I did see a person who had a videotape confession get off because the attorney was able to get the confession thrown out.
Okay. Yeah.
That's the only reason it was getting thrown out. So I'm not going to say you can never get off without a videotape confession because it can happen if you can get it thrown out. Well, they couldn't get it thrown out. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah. It's overwhelming. The evidence is really overwhelming. And yes, like you said, South Africa made it impossible for them to overlook it. They did really a remarkable job, I think. Yeah. Okay. Switch gear. The U.S. election. That's originally I was going to talk to you about. After New Hampshire, you think Donald Trump is not stoppable right now? He's going to be the nominee, even though he still have lots of legal troubles, right? He has a lot of court cases still pending. But you think he will be the candidate for the Republican Party?
I mean, I think at this point it's over. You know
Okay.
what I mean? I'll put it like this. Here's what I said. 30 minutes after after they started counting the votes in New Hampshire, right? I mean, and what was the first? Iowa was the
Yes,
caucuses.
I was first.
30
Yes.
minutes after they stopped that, they called it and said Trump won. And here's what I said. 30 minutes after the Iowa caucus, after the primary started, you can call the whole primaries because they're in, you know what I mean? Come on. I mean, look, Nikki Haley's 30 points behind Donald Trump in her own state. So to me, how could anyone make a credible argument that there's any possibility that anybody could win there's only one person running against Donald Trump, and this person is 30 points behind Donald Trump in their own state. This thing's over. Trump's going to be the nominee. There's no question about that. And now it's interesting that you brought up the issue of the charges because look, 2008, Barack Obama comes in and says, look, yeah, there's complaints of illegality against George Bush and Dick Cheney, certainly. Against Karl Rove, fair enough. but we're going to move forward. We don't want to look back. We're not going to investigate them for the crimes they may or may have not committed. We've got to move forward. They're ex-presidents. That's all over. Let's move forward, right? So if you're involved in lying the country into war, all manner of criminality, we're moving forward. We don't need to do that. And they literally charged Donald Trump because he overvalued the property in a real estate deal in New York City. Nobody complained. The bank was like, yeah, we're all right. We got our money back. The people that sold it, everything's fine. And they're like, well, you said the property was worth more. It is. We can't look backward. We're not going forward now. We must charge an ex-president with that. And charged by a guy who said on his platform when he ran was, elect me and I'll charge Donald Trump. And we're supposed to believe those. He got elected and he charged Donald Trump. Literally in New York, the government of New York went in session and they passed a law. And the law said, if you were sexually assaulted by someone over a certain amount of time, the statute of limitations is up. You can't sue them. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to open that statute of limitations up for 1 year, just in case there might be somebody who that happened to, you can sue them. 1 minute after 12, this woman sues Trump. They literally changed the law so somebody could sue Trump. This is lawfare. This is a government. This is the deep state. This is the Democratic Party saying we will use any manner of legal options we can, or illegal options in this case, to take out Donald Trump. So all it is, 96 charges against Donald Trump. Literally, I mean, here's the thing about it. So they're saying, well, Donald Trump says that the election was unfair, was rigged in 2020, and therefore, that's terrible. You can't say that the election wasn't rigged. So, he was trying to overthrow a perfectly clear and clean election where there was no rigging going on. Give you one quick example of rigging. Make it quick. 2019, the Federal Bureau of Investigations goes to a little computer shop in Delaware, and they grab this laptop. It was Hunter Biden's laptop that had all kinds of bad things that Hunter Biden did, some possibly even pointing to Joe Biden's illegalities. Okay. The FBI gets that laptop. They take it back. They don't tell anybody they have it. They've got this laptop. They know they know that it is in fact Hunter Biden's laptop, because the reason they got it was the owner of the computer store called them and said, I have Hunter Biden's laptop. He left it here. He didn't come get it. You guys are the FBI, come get it. So they went and got it. So they knew that it was Hunter Biden's laptop. 2 months before the election, that same FBI who had Hunter Biden's laptop, who knew it was Hunter Biden's laptop, then went to the social media and the news. They didn't tell them that they had Hunter Biden's laptop. They told them something far different. What they said was, if someone comes to you and says that Hunter Biden's laptop is out there and it has incriminating evidence against Joe Biden, it's a Russian misinformation plan. And make sure you censor them, and we'd be happy to help censor them. They lied. They knew good and darn well that that was not, and they didn't say, we've got it. Because then somebody would say, well, have you inspected it to make sure? No, they didn't tell them we have it. They just said, if somebody says it exists, it's a Russian plot, and you got to censor it, and we'll help you censor it. Now, to me, it is rhetorically unassailable that they did that to interfere with the election. That was election interference. So now Donald Trump said there was election interference and the election was rigged by the government. And we have just established that the FBI, and it works for the Department of Justice, they are part of the government, and they took an action that clearly is election interference. So how are you going to arrest Donald Trump and charge him with saying the election was rigged? The DOJ is going after it. The FBI works for the DOJ. The DOJ worked to rig the election, to interfere with the election on behalf of Joe Biden, and they're charging Donald Trump with saying that the election was rigged on behalf of Joe Biden. It is preposterous. Of course it was. They know it was because they did it. And so, as I said, this is lawfare. It's lawfare against Donald Trump. It is the elite ruling class saying Donald Trump is a threat to our imperial notions for wars and hegemony. Not that I don't know how much of a threat he really is, but they see him as a threat. And therefore, I mean, let's face it, he tried to get a deal in North Korea. That's they do not want peace on the Korean Peninsula. That alone is enough to get them to do something to take Donald Trump out. So that's where we are as far as lawfare going into them. It has nothing to do with whether and or not you like Donald Trump. Because when I make this argument, people will say, "Oh, so you like Donald Trump?" I say it's irrelevant. Argue the issues that I'm bringing up. It is now. The discussion of law should be about equal protection under the law, right? It should be about everyone getting the same treatment under the law, right? And what we're talking about here is because you don't like Donald Trump, you want to use the law to thwart him. Well, what happens when you like a candidate and the system doesn't like him? They're going to do the same darn thing. So you're setting yourself up. A lefty like me, I was a Bernie Sanders fan, not so much anymore, but I was. And I knew good and well, look what they did. They did the same thing to take Bernie Sanders out. They just used a lighter version of it. So I'm not going to somehow think that the system is acting on our behalf. They're acting on their behalf because Trump won't do some things that they want. Certainly, I wouldn't vote for Trump. As I said, I'm far to the left of all of these parties. I'll write in the ghost of Eugene Debs or something like that. I'll be writing in. But you get my point.
Yeah, I'm going to write in too if it's between the two of them.
Either that, I'm between the ghost of Eugene Debs and the ghost of Hugo Chavez. One of those two I'm writing in. Why not both?
Yeah. Regarding our legal system, I mean, it's a good follow-up, right? Because regarding this Epstein case, I want to check with you is now I made a program for my Chinese audience about just to tell them what happened because there's a lot of confusion. One thing is everybody's shocked with the scale of the Epstein case. Like it involves so many people and it's lasted that long. The very first time the police heard about him is this girl's name, I think is Mary Farmers. She was one in 1996. She went to the police in New York and telling the police that not only her, but her sister, who was underage at the time, was sexually harassed by Epstein himself. And she even bring up that there were other girls, young girls in and out of Epstein's residence and offices, which should be very suspicious. There should be red flag all over the place. But the police did nothing, right? In 1996, they could have stopped this guy in 1996. That's even 2 years before he bought the island. But they did nothing. They absolutely did nothing. Now, why is that? Is our legal system, political system, is just very corrupt? Is that what it is?
No, that's not what it is at all. So let's not forget what else happened. A bit later, in Florida, Jeffrey Epstein was found legally to be involved in the same chicanery, sexually abusing young girls. They called it prostitution. All kinds of things happened, things that would, of course, get you a lot of years in jail. The U.S. government gave him a year. I mean, Florida gave him a year, like of weekends in jail or something, and he got to stay home at his mansion. So basically, they did nothing to him. A guy named Alex Acosta was in the Trump administration. When the whole Epstein thing really blew up is when he said, people asked him, how could you oversee such a sweetheart deal for Jeffrey Epstein in Florida? And he said, I was told he's intelligence. Leave him alone. And the people who were interviewing him said, oh, okay, no problem. It's fine. Why? Because he was intelligence. This is not a law enforcement issue whatsoever. The law enforcement has no ability to overturn an intelligence operation by whichever, until you can, certainly guess which intelligence agencies were involved, but certainly a police department can't overturn, the CIA or whoever the hell it is that's involved. Now, let's not forget, his partner was Ghislaine Maxwell. What do we know about Ghislaine Maxwell? Her father was named Robert Maxwell. He had a book written about him, and the name of the book was Robert Maxwell, Israel's Super Spy. Ghislaine Maxwell's father was a spy for Israel. When he died, his body was taken to Israel, and he received it was received by the prime minister of Israel, and he was buried alongside of prime ministers and the highest figures of Israel, right? This is Ghislaine Maxwell's fault. And we're supposed to think it was just coincidence that she happened to end up with Jeffrey Epstein, who spent money like he printed it, who spent money like he ran the Fed. But really, there's really no evidence. We were told he was like a money manager. There's no evidence of any money he managed. There's no evidence of any corporations he ran. Nobody knows. Here's a guy who spent money by the unthinkable billions. There is no evidence anywhere that he ever made a penny. So it's clear that he was a spy. As I said, we can guess who he was working for. This was an intelligence operation. And imagine the depravity of a government that would be involved in child sex trafficking so that they could get evidence against people that would then force them to go in the direction of that they are, maybe some of them are even going now to support genocide. One could argue that there are people that you're saying, why is this person support? Doesn't seem that. And it's somewhere, there's somebody with videotape saying, hey, good work there, buddy. Just keep doing what you're doing. And this videotape won't slip out on the TikTok.
Yeah, I guess that's what explains it, that he's very special. But I still find it's amazing that you can use national security, you can control our legal system like this. I mean, the guy is committing some serious crimes and then he just get off and again and again, and nothing happens to him.
That's what happens. Yes,
Yeah.
it was in service to imperialism. The fact of the matter is this: he was a political tool of imperialism.
Mm-hmm.
He was one of the policy tools of imperialism. One of the underhanded, dirty tools, in the same way that the CIA goes into countries and they do kidnappings and they overthrow governments and they do all kinds of terrible things. Read the Phoenix Program. It's a book I got right there, the Phoenix Program, about the terrible things that the U.S. did in the Philippines and the Vietnam. And they tell our people we're acting for good and in good faith. And really, we're doing the most horrible things. Just another example. That's all it is. It's another example of the truth of the depravity of imperialism.
Pretty remarkable. In the meantime, I want to ask you, the last question is the mass layoff, right? You see there is a lot of tech companies that lay off people. But it's not just a tech company. It's even like a fast food restaurants and chains, they are saying that they want to speed up this using machine instead of people for the next 5 years. So even those jobs, it seems like we probably eventually going to lose a lot of them. And at the same time, the stock market seems doing well, and supposedly we still have low unemployment rate. How does that make sense? People don't feel that good in terms of, if compared to the numbers you give them. I mean, it doesn't make. I mean, how do you explain all these things happening at the same time?
Certainly, in 2008, after the 2008 crash, one of the things that happened was this: banks put people out of their houses, right? Repossessed the houses. So they, made money. They wrote off the loans and they were paid off by the government for their loans. Then they still got to repossess the houses. Then they sold the houses and made money again. And then after all of this, the American people were out on the street, impoverished, laid off, looking bad. Financially, it was terrible for them, right? But the banks made more money on paper. So then the government then said, we're in a recovery, because according to the GDP, all of this profit was coming in for the bank. So our gross domestic product was increasing, although the misery index of the working class was going down. So what we have now is that we have an elite ruling class, whether it's bankers, tech workers, whatever, tech owners, et cetera, these billionaires, they make more money, which then the gross domestic product looks good. It looks good on paper, but the actual misery of the working class continues to increase. So basically, as they say, figures lie and liars figure. They're happy to be able to give us figures to say, according to these figures, things are looking good, the economy's great. It's almost like a person who, let's say they want to lose 20 pounds and they do all of this stuff and they gain 5 pounds. And someone says, how are you doing? And they pull out this documentation. I've taken in this amount, I've gone by, according to these figures, I'm looking good. Now they gained 5 pounds, but they can show on documents how they've done all the right things. And according to everything, things are looking good. It's the difference between, as the old saying, sound policies and policies that sound good. It's the difference between, the government being able to use various machinations of economic policy to argue that things are strong. Again, it goes back to this. The elite ruling class does not care about the people. They're making money and looking good. So as far as they're concerned, the economy is going great. And what happens to the working class is irrelevant. It's the capitalism thing. We can make more money if we pay our employees less or get rid of our employees. But at some point, it spins out of control. What is it? The crisis of overproduction, where the people who are making the things can't afford to buy them. The people who are selling the things can't afford to buy them, where the working class can't afford to buy the products, and eventually your economy turns inside out and falls apart. And we are getting there. That's all the layoffs. They don't need them. But then who's going to buy their products and services if they lay everybody off? But they don't think like that.
And GDP in general is a bad measurement. I just saw that Ukraine had a 5% increase in GDP last year. I mean,
right. It doesn't make, bottom line, I can sit here and come up with figures to show that I'm worth $10 million. I'm not. Here's one. I can bring in, say, between Bill Gates and I, we are the average net worth is $75 billion. He's worth 150 billion, and I ain't. But between the two of us, and that people are like, wow, Garland's worth $75 billion. I didn't know that. And between him and Big Bill Gates, it's an average. So you just take these numbers and say, according to these numbers, X is true. But in the real world, it's not true. But it sounds good. And you do that because it benefits you.